What up? What up? Students, I know this may shock you, but I'm going to admit something to you right now. Mr. Dowdy is an idiot. I just spent 25 minutes recording a screencast on principles of the Constitution, changing the Constitution, and when I got to the end of it, I'm like, I didn't say it, but I'm thinking, I've seen this chart before. I already had a screencast of this. Before recording, I checked my YouTube page. I'm like, oh, I guess I don't have a screencast. I do. It's on my website. So now you have two separate screencasts, a fall edition and a winter edition of Principles of the Constitution, Changing the Constitution. Unbelievable. Oh, Donald Trump. 22 conservative leaders attacked Donald Trump. Watching a little CNN in the background on a fun Friday night. Uh, the good thing for you is the one that I'm posting, the Ed Puzzle, is the winter edition, which is about 6 or 7 minutes shorter than the fall edition. So, anyways, I'm not a big fan of wasting my own time, but I just did. Origins of the American Federalism, or of American Federalism. Again, you know, federalism is close to my heart, the 10th Amendment. I heart the 10th Amendment. Why? There's a variety of reasons. Some of it is a conflict between states and the federal government, which is intriguing to me. But more importantly, I think it allows for experimentation in our large republic, uh, which allows states to experiment with different public policy issues. And I think it's just ingenious, whether the framers meant it or not, for them to allow this flexibility in regards to states determining how they're going to initiate different public policies. And we'll talk about them as we proceed through this set of notes. But again, federalism, 10th Amendment, division of power between the national government. The Constitution establishes the powers of the national government, and then it reserves powers to the states, but it doesn't specify. Please put an asterisk next to that statement that I just made. It doesn't specify specifically what powers the states have, which has led to a ton of conflict in the last 150 years between the federal government and the states. So, why did we come up with, or why did the framers come up with this federal structure of government? Well, we come from a system, or we came from a system that was more unitary in nature, and this idea that the central government had too much power. And there was a fear, especially with the anti federalists, that the central government was going to dictate what the states did in regards to policy, and that states would not have a say on certain issues. So you have this compromise with the 10th Amendment, the final component of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, that allows for states to have a lot of decision, or maybe it was intended for states to have a lot of decision in how to enact different public policies. We know that the Confederacy, under the Articles of Confederation, this Confederate system, was undesirable. It was a system that led to a variety of problems that had to be addressed. The federal government, or the national government, was too weak. And so federalism is ingenious because it allows us to be united, but we don't have to conform in regards to different public policy areas, at least those that are not listed as areas in which the federal government should be able to dictate. It's very suitable for a nation our size. We have regional differences, certainly on different policy areas, whether it's guns, gay rights, marriage, um, marijuana, prostitution, all of these things. You know, you're talking about policy areas that are not explicitly addressed in the Constitution. States have a lot of leeway in determining just how far they're going to allow their citizens to go with those particular public policy areas. It allows for a lot of difference amongst individuals, and one of the things that is the hallmark of our democracy is the liberty to be ourselves and do the things that we want to do. In some states, you have great liberty. In other states, that liberty is restricted to some degree. It is a check on tyranny because no one portion of government, specifically the fear of a central government, can be all powerful. And certainly the fallout of all of this is it leads to a lot of conflict on certain policy areas. One of the, I would think, more controversial issues that has evolved over certainly the last 100 years, and we'll talk in more detail later, is this idea of the federal government telling the states what to do. These are called mandates. If I mandate that you have to do no cards for vocab and then LOL, I don't accept them, you get kind of angry. Think of yourself as the states. I'm the national government. I told you you have to do vocabulary note cards, and then you get nothing out of it. I promise I don't do that in a vindictive way, but it kind of mimics what the federal government does. A lot of times they tell the states what to do. No Child Left Behind is educational reform. I talked about the Americans with Disabilities Act, which we'll go into more detail later. The idea that the federal government says that states, local governments must make accommodations, public accommodations, handicapped accessible. And we won't go into a big discussion now, but we certainly will later on that piece of legislation. It allows for experimentation, whether you like it or not. And certainly we are not pro marijuana because Elmhurst is a wholesome community. We are not pro prostitution or gambling because Elmhurst is a wholesome community. But in some states, you're allowed to, at the state level, determine whether or not your citizens can participate in these activities. Doesn't mean they have to, but again, you have areas of the country, regional areas that are more conservative and others that are more liberal, and that is because of federalism. Now, let's look at the historical trends. When we talk about the historical trends of federalism, we are looking at how much the federal government historically has interacted with the states. And originally, they were very separate, and we use a cake analogy, which is really fun. Everyone loves cake. Actually, I don't really like cake, but nonetheless, everyone likes cake. So we use this cake analogy in regards to originally on the right side here, you can think of the first layer as a federal government, the first layer of cake. They were very, very separate. There was explicitly a separation between what the federal government could do and what the state governments could do. So the top layer is the federal powers, middle layer might be the state powers, and the lower layer might be local government powers. Very separate. There was not a lot of interaction between the different levels of government. So originally, and it should be no surprise that with the passage of this Constitution, the federal government had their power and the states had theirs, and there was not a lot of interaction because there was concern that we didn't want the central government or the national government to be, getting their hands into the rights of what the states could do. So that's dual federalism. There's a very, very clear separation between the powers of the national government and the states. We start to evolve in the early 20th centuries, and the reason for that is some states were struggling. We had the Great Depression. Some states had citizens who were really, really struggling financially. And here is when you begin to have states looking to the national government to help them out. So you begin to blur the lines that are clearly defined in this type of cake, and you start to blur them and mix them, and you get this idea of marble cake federalism. And so you have a mingling responsibility, meaning the national government starts to interact with the state governments in public policy areas. A great example of this is Nevada. Nevada, if you've ever been there, it's a lot of desert. There's not a lot of resources. So financially, the state was not doing very well. So they're looking for assistance from the national government. And they get assistance because, as you know, the national government gets a huge pot of money from every state in the nation. And then they distribute that money. So what you have in the early 20th century, is specifically in Nevada, is you have the building of the Hoover Dam. Las Vegas doesn't exist without the Hoover Dam, providing power, energy to that region. They wouldn't be able to build that by themselves, so you have this cooperation between the national government and the state of Nevada to build the Hoover Dam, which leads to this explosion, specifically of Las Vegas. So it's not necessarily a negative thing that you start to have interaction between the federal government and the states. And it just doesn't happen in Nevada. You have New Deal projects that occur across the nation, projects that stimulate jobs and growth in different states. And it's, again, not looked as a bad thing. It's kind of like spreading out the wealth of the nation to help those states that may be struggling. And we look at this as cooperative federalism. There's cooperation between the states and the federal government, and the federal government primarily is providing money to the states for various projects. There's even one, I'm not sure which pool, maybe East End, I don't know. The older pool in Elmhurst was built with New Deal funds. The idea that the federal government is going to give the city of Elmhurst money so they can build a recreational facility, a pool, which therefore spurs jobs to build that pool, and everyone benefits. So originally, marble cake federalism was not looked at, or cooperative federalism was not looked at as a negative thing. It was the federal government helping regional areas of our country which were struggling primarily from an economic standpoint. So this is a good thing. Again, you talk about different policy areas, and you're talking about cooperation between the federal government and the states. We are past this paranoia of the central government becoming too powerful. The central government, on the contrary, is looked at as very helpful, and as a whole, as our country, we benefit from this kind of shift to more cooperation between the national government and the states. Then we begin to have a change because the federal government becomes bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. They start to get their hands on more and more and more and more different policy areas, and you have this resistance. And you go back to this decentralized idea where more power is going to be located at the states. You have this movement start to re-evolve. And you have individuals, specifically conservatives and Republicans in the 70s and 80s, start to say, you know what? The federal government is starting to get their hands on too many public policy areas. And this is where we will evolve and kind of where we're at now, which is called New Federalism. And the idea is states start to say, whoa, hold up. Federal government, Washington, D.C., you are starting to control too many or trying to control too many policy areas. You've gone too far. And again, this is the idea that Republicans start this movement, and they get a lot of traction. And the Republicans start to take over the executive branch, Ronald Reagan in the 80s, Papa Bush in the early 90s, and the whole premise of their success and their ideology or their beliefs are that the national government has become too big and states need to start to control again some of these policy areas. So this is new federalism. So you're shifting power and authority back to the states. Certainly, you see this discussion, this dialogue, this rhetoric with Republicans in this primary that we're witnessing today. Again, it's tied to Congress and presidents Nixon, Reagan, two Republican presidents that are saying, advocating more power to the states. That the national government doesn't have to be as big as it is. One of the terms that is tied to this is devolution revolution. I know it sounds crazy, but it was a term used to say that we need to devolve power. Devolve, think of it as dissolve. Think of it as an Alka-Seltzer. If you're familiar with it, it's a little tablet. And think of it as all the power in the central government. And the water is our country. And when you drop the tablet in the water, it starts to dissolve and go away, and there's no longer power in the central tablet. It's going back to the states. I hope that's not too confusing. I'm just trying to use an analogy, but you're giving power or taking power from the central government, DC, the federal government, and giving it back to the states in regards to different policy areas. And so literally they had this contract with America. They ran on the idea that we are listing all of these policy areas that the national government should not control any longer, and that states should be able to control those areas, such as education. The national government started to have a greater role on what schools were teaching, and people didn't like that. People in the South wanted to be able to control what their students were learning, people in the Midwest, etc. So the Republicans in Congress, they ran for election based upon this idea that here's a contract that we promise that if we're elected, we're going to put all of these policy areas and take them away from the national government and allow states to determine them again. And a good example of that is welfare. Welfare is the giving of money for those who are struggling financially, and the federal government had a uniform welfare policy for the nation. And states didn't like that. They wanted to control how much money individuals got in regards to welfare. And for some reason, AP loves the Welfare Reform Act of 1996. I wonder why I put that in bold. And so Congress, once it was overtaken by the Republicans, they passed this piece of legislation. And no longer would the federal government determine the guidelines or qualifications that individuals had to meet to get welfare or money because they're struggling, but states would get money in a chunk, and they would determine the qualifications for citizens to receive welfare in their state. So now you had states, you might go to Texas, and the maximum amount of money you got per month is $300 if you were struggling financially and you were on welfare. You go to California, you might get $800. Not only that, but they could determine the qualifications. So, for example, in Florida, you have to take a drug test. And if you fail that drug test, you don't get welfare. In other states, they don't have that. So again, it was this idea that the states wanted to control the qualifications for, in this case, welfare policy. And every state would be different. So it's a retreat or going away from what we had evolved into with cooperative federalism, where the government played a big role in a lot of different public policies, and it allowed the states to make the decisions again. So again, new federalism is very much like dual federalism. So we start dual federalism where the state and national government are very separate. They start to cooperate, and the national government plays a bigger role in policy areas. And then there is a call for concern that the national government is playing too big of a role. So it's this retreat and going back to the states having more rights. So that's kind of the evolution of the interaction between the national government and the states in regards to federalism. I will field any questions on Monday. I'm sure you'll have some write them on the board. Have a great weekend. Peace.